Chapter 1. The Second Death. Moulin felt a sudden shudder. The chilling cold crept all over his skin. He curled his body, not holding back his sneezes. His eyes trembled as he opened them. Is judgment this cold? It felt like shards of ice were embedded inside his pores. His body refusing to warm him. Confused and shivering, he could swear he finished the bottle of antidepressants, ending his own life. The betrayal of his childhood friend and boyfriend was the last strand of motivation for living. Orphaned and abandoned, what kind of sick joke are the heavens playing with him? Lips turning a pale shade of purple, he let out a warm breath. The ground was as cold as a bed of ice. Sharp and dull bumps sank into his back. He recalled that he was lying on his bed in the middle of summer. Then why was it freezing? The money left from the savings couldn't even buy a decent AC. A sharp ache pierced in his head abruptly. He groaned, shifting his body to turned on his side. The pain was excruciating, like knives cutting every part of his flesh. Flashes alternate from one scene to another like fragments of memories materializing, portraying the life of a person very unfamiliar to him. He gave a deep breath, gritting his teeth. Moulin was confused and anxious. The memories that didn't belong to him streamed like a film and imprinted in his mind, but the frigid cold was too distracting for him to react about everything currently happening. And when everything came to an abrupt stop, he opened his eyes. Is this a joke? He couldn't even live the life that was made for him, and now fate played with him again by letting him live the life of a stranger. This was just too much for him to bear. Is this even some kind of punishment? 'Cause it sure wasn't some hell of a gift of pity for ending his own sad life. Just as he was about to lift a middle finger to the air, what greeted him ahead of his sight was the view of large hanging icicles. The sharp points of tens of solid ice threatened him with their glaring shine. Fear overwhelmed him and he sat up instantly. His elbows were scraped and tiny frozen smears of blood clung to the wounds. Moulin trembled, crawling backwards. Not sure if it was the cold or the fear of everything else. Moulin's gaze ran throughout every corner of the room, except it wasn't a room. His teeth clenched as he mentally cursed. This is a cave, damn it. Why am I so miserable? Moulin shivered, his knees on his chest and his arms in between. He tried to warm his hands, but they were trembling too much. He was too cold to even bother, realizing he was only wearing a white silk robe. The icy walls of the cave had a tiny glow in them, making them the only light source within this miserable place. It screamed of freezing cold and suffering. Even the floor wasn't spared, decorated by a thin layer of ice. At this rate, Moulin would die from hypothermia. A small ache flashed in his mind. Instantly his feet started freezing cold. He glanced down only to realize his feet had slowly begun to freeze into ice, climbing its way up rapidly. The fear of an unwelcome death rushed in his mind. His breathing started to speed up in panic as the ice locked his joints, stopping him from moving until it reached his neck. Cold. The biting cold froze his tears, the tortuous sting rose his cheek, froze his flesh within the eyes until his whole head had frozen. As Moulin's consciousness was slipping away, he found himself praying for help to whoever was listening. If God had given him this life as a second chance, then he would be more than willing to relive his life anew. Chapter 2. Awakening. Tick, tick, tick. A soft ticking echoed within the dark silent space. Like the last beat of a withering shattered clock. A faint glow materializing in the middle of the dark. A bright transparent body stood, enveloped by a warm glow. Pale feet implanted flat on the cold glass-like floor, like a blurry mirror reflecting the youth's frame. Moulin stood silent with one thought in mind. Am I dead? His thoughts were loud despite not speaking. He calmly gazed through the vast pitch-black space. Tick, tick, tick. He lowered his sight, figuring out if the ticking sound was coming from beneath him. In a blink of an eye, the glass floor disappeared and what replaced it was a glowing floor of solid ice. Like a blanket, a faint fog clouded the floor, reaching just below his knees. But Moulin didn't feel cold. Despite standing on a floor of ice, the soles of his feet weren't feeling that numbing bite of the cold, but instead it still felt like the cool glass floor that had disappeared. The youth furrowed his eyebrows. Well, of course, nothing makes sense if you're already dead. Perhaps this was a reminder of how he died. Tick, tick, tick. What is that sound? The confused youth strained his gaze on the floor, almost glaring at it. The ticking echoed louder and louder the longer he stared at the icy floor. As if luring him to find out. Finally, curiosity overwhelmed him and he couldn't help but crouch down, reaching out a pale hand. Fingers gently touched the surface of the frosty floor like a butterfly softly landing. His originally brown eyes reflected the blue glow of the floor. At this moment, he couldn't think of anything but be lured by an unknown call within the frozen ice. As his palm gently felt the floor, the ticking came to an abrupt stop. Silence once again swallowed the whole space. Snapping out of a trance and blinking, Moulin looked around innocently as if he had been wronged. What happened? It's absolutely creepier when the place became silent. Crack! The sudden sound startled the supposedly worried youth. He hastily gazed down on the floor where his hand was still planted on and noticed a web of cracks beneath it. Like a fragile shattering mirror, the frozen ice began cracking and crumbling. Moulin stood up quickly, taking a few steps back. Now he really felt like he did something wrong. Lines of cracks became bigger and longer as it spread outwards. The frightened Moulin had second thoughts of whether to run or not. If he was like any other person, he would definitely run, like their lives depended on it. The continuous sound of breaking ice echoed from a few miles away. Crack, crack. Moulin looked down by instinct. Beams of bright light leaked between the cracks. It was blinding. The floor beneath his feet started to glow a bright blue, brighter than before. The beams of light from miles away were clearly visible from where Moulin stood. His body began to feel heavy and he felt a sudden dizziness in his brain. Tired and frustrated with the series of the strange happenings around him, for the 100th time, once again he began to curse to whoever was playing with him. This clearly was punishment. The flooring kept breaking and breaking. More and more light leaked through. Moulin felt it was at the brink of collapsing. His senses warning him it was too late to run away. He regrettably wondered why he wasn't able to run away sooner. The glow began to grow more and more intense. He shielded his eyes from the vivid brilliance from where he stood and braced himself. A tiny voice suddenly whispered inside his ear. For a moment, it was all he could hear. "Please live for me." A burst of light engulfed the entire space. In the dimly lighted ice cave, a frozen sculpture-like frame of a frail youth with his knees bent and a lost expression etched on his attractive face, rested against the wall. Like a painting from the finest artists, the cave was silent except for the bell-like sound of hanging icicles as if preparing to welcome a guest. A faint light became visible within the large icy walls of the frozen cavern. Glowing like blue transparent crystals. The hanging icicles at the irregular ceiling lit up like exquisite stars. Ha! Ha! Moulin inhaled a lungful of air, feeling relieved. Like he had been freed from a bad experience. A chilly air swept over his skin, making him feel a sense of comfort. His chest alternatively rises and lowers as he kept taking deep breaths. He had imagined being frozen into ice and it felt unbelievably realistic. Dying twice was absolutely not a fun experience. Eventually, Moulin's sight began to focus and the shock almost made him die a third time. It wasn't a dream, so he really had died twice. His soul had really transferred to another body. How could this be? It wasn't even scientifically possible. He took a minute to calm himself down and began to survey the area. Panicking won't answer all his questions, of course. The cave was entirely made of solid ice. If someone were to stay here long, it would be like freezing a fish in a freezer. But how come he currently wasn't? It was pretty damn real when he became a human popsicle the moment his soul transferred to this body. He felt strangely cool. The ice under his bare feet felt slightly chilly but not freezing at all. Moulin carefully stood up, lifting himself from the floor. He staggered, clumsily supporting himself with the wall. Why didn't he transfer into a more healthier body? This thin hands and the slender fingers. Taking a careful step after another careful step, he began to walk slowly towards the chilly breeze. Clearly, it has to come from an opening. The cave had many tunnels, both small and big ones. Moulin has to trust his instincts. As he left, the once bright cave began to dim. Chapter 3, White and Silver. While walking for some time, he began to sort out his memories. He still could not believe every unnatural event happening to him. Korhan is the name of the world he is currently residing. Races and beings who were thought to be fictitious were unbelievably existing in this strange world. Elves and mystical creatures reside in the lush forests, beastmen with their own civilization, and rare mythical creatures with their own territories. The Meruthans are known as humans who possess elemental abilities with the use of their mana. However, only 40% of the human race are known to be Meruthan. Predominantly, those who have noble blood are Meruthans. The bright color of their eyes indicates their elemental abilities. In the cold regions of the kingdom of Orona, reside the Francis family. An aristocratic family with pure Meruthan blood and striking bright gray eyes. They possess the ability of Syrokinizes, the ability of ice and snow. Moulin's eyebrow twitched. His hand put a bit of pressure on the wall as he continued walking. This world is too good to be true. Moulin Francis was the owner of the vessel he was currently in. the sickly youngest son of the noble France's family. Moulin still had a weak physique, and in addition to being the baby of the family, he was most doted on. What countered his pale, precious, and innocent appearance was his sharply indecent tongue, arrogant personality, and impious taste of lavishness. He had a severe distaste of anything plain and unadorned. Because of this he slowly earned the disdain of his two elder brothers against him. The beginning of his misfortune started when he lusted over the young master of a renowned noble household, Quade, the heir of the Acute family. A simple act of kindness made Moulin decidedly obsessed with Quade to the point of sabotaging his engagement ceremony. The big commotion made the France's family lose face in front of hundreds of highborn. On one hand, Quade and the young fiancé of his eased the situation with a show of profound love. The young Moulin became subjected to the voices of rebuke and ridicule. How arrogant of him as someone of noble blood, to not inherit his family's symbolic ability and bearing a spoiled and unruly character, dare think can have what he desired with a snap of his fingers. How humorous. Afterward, the rumors of the youngest son of the France's family was known for being vicious and conceited. The head of the France's household and the father of Moulin was enraged. The anger of his brothers was no less. His father exiled him to the abandoned Lazulin manor in the northern regions. However, for the sake of his wife who loved Moulin despite the situation, Moulin will be banished there just until the situation dies down. Unfortunately, the carriage followed a shortcut through the freezing mountains and encountered thieves. They attacked the carriage and escorts, murdering every single person who was breathing. Moulin managed to escape the slaughter, dashing through frosty winds and deep snow in the woods. He hid inside a glacier cave, more precisely a hollowed part of an icy mountain, and stayed there ever since. Moulin was frail and had no idea about surviving. Living his life of comfort and wealth made him very ignorant of the dangers of nature. He died after a few days of hunger and the cold. The frosty breeze brushes Moulin's face. Finally, he stood at the exit of the cave. As he closed his eyes, he pitied the original owner of the body a little bit. In truth, he was just a naive little youth. The original had fallen so hard for this Quade guy that he can't even realize that the person had been using his affections to garner attention. He spread the news that this young master from the France's family had been stalking him and obsessing over him. That hypocrite had been faking in front of Moulin, flirting with him and smiling smugly as soon as he turned his back. Worse of all, he had been using Moulin so that his fiancée and her family would pay more attention to him. Although Moulin still Francis was spoiled and extravagant, he was naively shy inside. Noticing that his brothers were alienating him, he became more inclined to earn their praise and affection as they had before by secretly making tiny trinkets for them, but he never had the chance to give it. Instead, he hid it beside his bed hesitantly. When his father punished him, he never whined and cried because he knew what he did was wrong. Out of guilt, he had written a small letter to his father and was too ashamed to give it to him in person, so he asked a servant to do it after he left for Lazulin Manor. Everyone had thought wrongly about him. This young master was still a little boy in heart. He wasn't vicious, only a bit mischievous. He too had many regrets in his heart. Even out of all the jewelry Moulin still had, what he never took off was his mother's sapphire necklace, absolutely old and plain. Moulin sighed pitifully. He looked down on his chest and touched the sapphire necklace around his neck. You were actually so stupidly naive and shy, acting to be so tough, and your family doesn't even know that. The sun had just risen and the sky seemed like a splash of orange and purple, creating a beautiful gradient. Moulin exhaled at the breathtaking frozen mirror-like lake that had reflected the sky. Gorgeous snowy mountains and snow-covered tall trees surrounded the frozen lake, an enchanted painting. Surprisingly, he still could not believe he had actually transmigrated. A cold breeze danced around him, but the cold never bothered him. He thought hard, not taking a step out of the ice cave. The original owner was pitiful and touched somewhere deep inside Moulin. He closes his eyes and said a little prayer for him to the heavens. A snowflake fell on his nose and melted on his pale skin. If he is now the owner of this body, then he will live his life to the fullest. Unlike the original, if he would ever encounter that scumbag Quade, he'd greet him with a nice kick to the genitals. A little revenge wouldn't hurt. Moulin smiled as he took a step out of the cave. Let the past be a reminder of his stupidity and the motivation to live a bright new future. The snow fell gently from the skies like tiny falling stars. Moulin walked to the shore of the frozen lake and peeked at his reflection. All along he had not paid attention to his white long wavy hair. The silverish white hair fell down his waist with bits of snow decorating it. The frozen lake couldn't really show all of his appearances clearly, but what was undeniably noticeable was his pair of silver eyes. These striking silver pupils could hook one's soul off guard. Moulin didn't actually like being too attractive, but this face, he could not bring himself to hate it. However, in the memories, he recalled that Moulin originally had grey ash-brown hair like his mother and his father's deep grey eyes. What exactly caused this great transformation? Before he could think of any clues, a loud noise grumbled. Moulin stiffened and sighed pitifully. Moulin hugged his starving stomach, frowning. Of course, first, he has to fill his stomach before everything else. Chapter 4. A Fox. Moulin entered the woods, hungry but vigilant. Who knows what creatures lurk in these cold woods? The deep snow reaches above his ankle and the snowfall rained down softly. The white frozen snow decorated the trees exquisitely that Moulin had already stopped a few times admiring it. Moulin's first plan was to live through this harsh terrain. Snow covered almost every part of the mountains. The cold no longer had any effect on him, so that was one problem solved. What worried him was his source of food and water. There was no vegetation anywhere, for the snow had frozen the ground. He couldn't drill a hole into the frozen lake since the ice appeared to be too thick to crack. Moulin racked his head for solutions, his forehead creasing. At this rate, he is going to die from starvation. He looked around the woods thinking that a few animals might be living in this cold region. He had spotted a few nibbled pine cones lying on the snow when he walked here. So he walked ahead, trying his hardest to step through the snow when suddenly he felt a tug. The youth looked down behind him to realize a small creature had bitten the end of his long silky coat. It had snow-white fur and looks to be a fox. For a moment, he thought that his meal had come to him instead. Moulin had never tasted fox-made food before. If he roasted it, would it taste like chicken? As if it knew what Moulin was thinking, it whined and rubbed itself on his leg pitifully. Its fur was extraordinarily soft. Moulin had a really soft spot for cute animals. Even if he thought that this fox was using its cuteness against him, he smiled and crouched down to stroke its head. The pretty fox rubbed his head on his palm and blinked at him. Moulin stiffened the moment he looked at its eyes. It was a dazzling silver white. It felt like looking at his own soul. A strange feeling crept inside his body unknowingly. He stroked the part below its eyes gently. He thought that its eyes looked particularly alike to his. The fox jumped happily around him, its little paws imprints cute paw prints on the ground. It tugs his coat again as if telling Moulin to follow it. Okay, he appeased. Lead the way. He followed the fox through the woods, memorizing the path as he walked. It leads him to a little slope where there were small pebbles. Moulin almost jumped for joy when he heard rushing water getting louder and louder the more he walked nearer. A river came into view surrounded by large and small black stones. It wasn't too wide for he could see the other side of the river. The fox jumped on a large rock near the river and happily looked at him as if asking to be praised. Moulin rolled his eyes at the cheeky creature and patted his head. This fellow really saved me the trouble. Good job. He stopped and thought of a name. Snow. He gave a gentle smile and the fox nuzzled its nose in his palm happily. Moulin then made his way to the edge of the river and touched the water. It was a little cold, but he could clearly see fishes swimming by. This time he could clearly look at his reflection. Such a beauty this is. Gorgeous silver white wavy hair, pale milky skin, rosy cheeks so full of life, and seductive red lips. An incubus. This is too enticing. If he was back to his original world with this face, he wouldn't be surprised if he'd be sexually assaulted. The finishing blow was his pair of utterly striking silver eyes. His wild imagination ran wild, him all alone in this woods, helpless and unarmed. If one of those bandits came and finds him. Moulin shivered and shook his thoughts away. He'll have to learn how to hunt and protect himself. He was too feminine looking, he could be mistaken for a girl if one wasn't careful. The thought made him frown a bit. He ripped a part of his silk coat and removed the thickest thread from it and started working on catching fish. Back on Earth, he wasted days and months watching those boring naked survival shows to impress this vile scum of a human ex of his who was so into these things since childhood. Although, all those knowledge was now a great aid this time. Sure, he's amateurish, but he'll get the hang of it sooner. The playful fox kept playing with the water, unaffected by the cold. He splashed around and chased some fish. Snow caught a few fish which delighted Moulin. The beautiful youth praised the little fox a few times, decidedly treating Snow as his new partner. For some reason, he felt a close bond with the fox. After catching an armful of fish, Moulin wrapped it with the coat. He was now unaffected by the freezing cold anyway. He was about to wrap things up when Snow jumped on his back, making Moulin lose his balance and fall forward. His heartbeat rising, a strong surge of energy expelled from his palms. Astonishingly, he fell on a soft snow bed instead of the river water. Feeling the softness against his bare slender fingers, he panted softly. His heart almost stopped for a second. He sat up abruptly and eyed the guilty-looking fox behind him. Snow whimpered, blinking his watery beady eyes. Moulin glared at him one last time and returned his gaze in front of him. A small part of the river, particularly in front of him, had frozen into ice, leaving a narrow pathway for the river water. Beneath him was a soft bed of frosty snow, fluffy and delicate, cushioned Moulin's fall. The speechless youth examined his dainty-looking fingers. The original Moulin had never inherited his family's ability to wield snow. Was this another side effect of the soul transfer? The confused Moulin recalled the soft voice that had whispered in his ear when he was within the dark space. He had never doubted that it wasn't real. If he could master this ability, then his troubles would be far more lesser. Moulin grinned. He'd use this ability to slap those who had forsaken the original Moulin. A soft whimper sounded beside Moulin's knees. Snow placed his paws on Moulin's thighs, gleeful that his master had unlocked his abilities. It licked its master's fingers happily. An eye twitched, as the young youth lifted the fox by its scruff, expressionless. On the other hand, Snow blinked its identical silver eyes, adorably. This little brat is even using its loveliness against me. Don't do that again. You almost gave me a heart attack. As Moulin predicted, Snow showed a cutely aggrieved face to him as if he was wrong. Moulin sighed helplessly. He carried Snow with one arm and stroked its fur. Just behave next time. Snow made a sound of happiness. Afterwards, Moulin and Snow traveled back to the frozen cave with the fish and a few rocks in his arms. So far, he had no plans to return back to the France's household. He doesn't even know where he is yet. No map, no compass, he was clearly stranded. Since he would have to remain here for a while, might as well get used to it. He plans to use the time to train his powers anyway. Miles away from the snowy freezing mountains of the north, soft gentle snowflakes rained down on the great elegant mansion of the France's family. Its gates were built with white gold and the France's family crest flag fluttered with the wind. Despite its extravagance, the estate was quiet, dim, and joyless. A gloved hand knocked twice on the large redwood double door. The young man creased his forehead, a faint redness at the corner of his eyes. Handsome locks of ash-brown hair, attractive lips, and stern gray eyes. He was refined and outstanding, however, currently, his heart was sorrowful. Maxel, the heir of the noble house, heard a faint response inside his father's office. He entered and what greeted him was his father's dreary frame. Chapter 5. Searching for Brother. The head of the household, a strict father and a valiant leader, stood in front of the tall windows of the room. In his hand was a letter from his youngest son. He had bravely battled in both politics and wars, but he could not fight the bitterness in his heart. When the news about his youngest son's tragedy came to the family, his wife had fainted and his two sons grieved. He blamed himself 1,000 times and very much wished would be able to reverse time. His heart drops at every empty news each time his knights found nothing from the search for his youngest son. Father, Maxel called. A worried expression etched his handsome face. MMN, his father responded. Exhaling deeply, Maxel took a step forward. The leader of the search team came by. He hesitated. The news would not help his father's mood even if he refuses to say it. The lord of the house turned to look at his eldest son. Based upon Maxel's expression, there was no good news. His eyebrows furrowed, devastated by the continuous negative results. 2 weeks had already passed since Moulin's disappearance. The northern mountains were known to be so cold a person would die in just a few hours without warmth. According to the search team's investigation, Moulin had run into the woods in nothing but thin clothes. The father had originally thought nothing could happen in his journey through the Lazulin manor. He sent strong knights and maids to care for Moulin. Yet such a situation still occurred unknowingly. Moulin was frail and can doubtlessly be unwell. He was such a sickly child ever since he was little. The thieves were caught and locked up, but no amount of torture could answer the doubts of the safety of his youngest son. Whether he was alive or not. Maxel stared at his father. A bad premonition clawing at his heart the longer he stared at the older man. Finally, he spoke. I wish to personally lead the search for my little brother. His resolute countenance faintly shadowed his anxious heart that his own father conceivably sensed what his thoughts were. I am not giving up the search, Maxel, his father sighed. He would refuse to do that. The lord walked over to his desk, a stack of reports laid by the side. Picking up a leather envelope, he eyed his son. The Golden Crown competition is still a bit far and it seems you still have a lot of time in your hands. Maxwell nodded, relief washed the doubts in his heart. Yes. Lord Francis handed him the navy leather envelope containing the latest investigation report of Moulin's disappearance. I trust you to find your younger brother. Bring him home to us. He had placed his trust over his eldest many times and he knows he won't let him down. He prayed for a little bit of hope in his heart. The determined heir nodded to his father. He will find his brother no matter how long it takes. I will. Bang. I am coming too, a voice rasped. Maxwell stared strictly at the uninvited guest. His gray eyes flashed and he spoke deeply, you are going to stay here and take care of mother. The identical gray eyes of the younger youth challenged his brother. Emlyn, the second young master of the Francis household. An air of frost hovered over his clenched right hand. He threw a snobbish smile at his elder brother who responded at him with an unreadable look. You are going to stay here, Lord Francis interrupted. Glancing at his second son, he smiled wearily. Your mother hasn't been herself for weeks. She won't even look me in the eye. Accompany her, Emlyn. I want to look for Moulin. I refuse to just sit here and wait while he might be dying out there buried under thick snow. Emlyn gnashed his teeth. Emlyn, Maxwell yelled. Enough. Both sons looked at their father, silently. The latter walked back to the windows gazing at the snow. The bitterness ran chaotically in his heart at the thought of his son devoid of life. How can he ever forgive himself if that were to be true? He was such a failure of a father to lead his precious son to his death. His thoughts ran rampant. He's not dead, Maxwell deeply convinced himself. He turned to glare at his younger brother, angrily. I will bring him back. Yes, he's going to find his younger brother and he will protect him. Moulin will never be in danger ever again. Why was he so cold to him before? Why did it all happen? He was a pampered child, of course, they tend to be a little mischievous. But Maxwell didn't have to go so far as to tell Moulin what a useless wreck he was, the shame of the family. The regret and the guilt all washed over him like a pool of black water. Emlyn stared at his elder brother. The man in front of him was always so forbidding and unsympathetic, but right now both of them had the same wish in their hearts. How unpleasant. Fine then, I'll stay. He was still defiant. However, if you fail, dear brother, no one is going to stop me from going. With that, he turned and left. Leaving his father and brother to settle things themselves, his loud footsteps sounded across the halls. Moulin, this weak brother of his, always stirred up his emotions. The rumors about his little brother in the academy pissed him off so much he almost murdered those wretched people. Those rats don't know shit about the real things. Now that Moulin's disappearance had also spread, their filthy mouths couldn't shut up about how Moulin deserved it. His patience shattered after hearing that. He craved to find this Quaid bastard and rip him apart. Clink. The young master's heavy steps gradually stopped. He lifted his right hand that had been clenching all the while and opened it with furrowed eyebrows. Inside was a thin silver bracelet. It looked a bit childish with the small blue gems around it, but what softened Emlyn's gaze was the sight of his name scribbled inside the silver band. Despair blanketed his beautiful gray eyes. Come back to us, little brother. A few weeks passed and the daring white snow fell over the mountains roughly. The sun was about to set, sending out a tint of purple in the clouded sky. The tall and sturdy black trunks of the trees stood bravely on the snow like rows of vengeful soldiers. Their fine leaves were blanketed by sheets of snow. A small white ball sat on a snow-covered rock, its ears perking up from a small call. Snow. The snowy fox hopped down the rock and ran with his little paws swiftly towards the sound of its master. He scurried over an open area and saw a figure of white beckoning him closer. Moulin stared at the part of the woods where snow had been, suspiciously. For a few days, he had been sensing a disturbance in the woods. His control over his ability was progressing steadily. Even though it was only self-taught, it was better than nothing. His progressive training helped him bond closer with ice and snow. As ridiculous as it sounds, it was undeniably true. His survival in these woods was also a bit advantageous now. His abilities helped him catch food and protect himself from wild animals. Although, he had to do more manual labor than he thought he would, such as making traps, making clothing, starting a fire, gathering dry wood, and 100 more. The days of forcing himself to watch naked survival shows with his scumbag ex really helped him. He was born with exceptional memory along with misery and suffering. Have you noticed anything? Moulin asked his little fox as he picked him up. Snow responded with a sound of disappointment. He felt that his master would think badly of him for the fact that he found nothing. Moulin chuckled and patted its head. It's all right. Try again tomorrow. We'll head to bed first. The young man had no one to converse with within this freezing place except for the snow-white fox that had never left his side ever since they first met. They returned to the ice cave where Moulin first awoke, treating it as his temporary home. Besides, the cave was a good place to stay away from the snow and the strange animals roaming around at night. It was also cozy. Moulin sealed up the entrance of the cave with a thick sheet of ice but left a small opening above for air to enter. Following a wide tunnel, they arrived at a wide roomy place with glowing walls of ice at every corner. The world he is currently living in is already strange and weird, so he didn't dwell on why the ice glows each time he enters. The young man and his fox friend slept peacefully, unaware of what was to come the next day. Chapter 6. Whispers and the Bathing Beauty. A Maruthan's power originates from their soul's energy. Calm your thoughts. Visualize the flow of your body's life energy into your meridians. Feel the frigid cold in from the dance of your fingers. Meld yourself with the ice and recognize its power. You are more powerful than you think you are. Moulin. Long beautiful eyelashes fluttered, revealing the silver pupils beneath. The snowy-haired young man opened his eyes lazily. He felt a slight movement from his back. Reluctantly, he sat up slowly and yawned sleepily. His foxy friend jumping into his lap, nuzzling itself in his arms. The blue glow of the ice fell on the youth's dozy frame like an ethereal painting. Moulin stroked Snow's fur out of habit. After a while, he began to recall the small voice in his sleep. He had been hearing this voice ever since the first night he slept. It sounded like the voice of a young child. Before, he was intensely creeped out by the thought of a ghost haunting him. But at present, he had gotten used to it. The voice taught him and guided him with mastering his abilities. He was a bit clumsy at first, almost freezing everything around him, but after training for numerous hours each day his skills began to enhance and his control progressive. The voice only speaks to him as he sleeps in the night, so the rest of his training was all up to him to figure out. Moulin could not ask it nor speak with it. The playful fox made a yippy bark, catching Moulin's attention. It seems like his master likes to doze off all the time. He wanted to cuddle more, but nature was calling. It hopped off his master's lap and began to scurry into the tunnel, waiting for his master. It wanted to do its business outside like a trained little pet. Moulin stood up and did brief stretches to start the day again. He started his new routine of cooking, hunting, and scolding Snow for always running off to nowhere. Noon came a few minutes after his training. Deep in the woods, 3 sharp large bolts of crystal ice impaled a thick dark tree a couple of meters away from a white-haired youth. Moulin observed the stake-like ice and realized that it was much larger than the others he tried before. Keeping in mind the lesson the voice in his sleep said, his offensive attacks became more and more violent. A proud smile appeared on his beautiful face as he felt pleased with his advancement. He lifted a pale hand and the stakes in the tree disintegrated into fine snowflakes. A bubbling joy seeped into his heart as he retracted his hand gleefully. I feel like a mysterious master of ice. He hadn't felt this much satisfaction for himself in a long time. A playful snowy breeze danced around him as if mimicking the young man's mood. He did a few stretches after the energy-draining activity. He was careful not to exhaust too much of his mana. If that were to happen, his continuous consumption of energy would drain his life away, and that was something he needed to avoid if he didn't wish to die again. A few minutes later, he felt strangely uncomfortable with his clothes. He was always wearing this garment because it was the only thing he has. He had no knowledge of making clothes except for cloaks and blankets. The fur he gathered as material was from wild white bears in the woods. He took a sniff from his sleeves and gagged. Moulin scrunched up his face in disgust and straightforwardly decided he needed to take a long bath. Cold water or not, he called Snow, who was rolling on a small hill of soft snow, amusing its own tiny self. Snow's little legs ran towards its master and stopped right in front of Moulin. The cute brat stared at him with beady eyes, asking to be lifted in Moulin's arms. No, Snow, I smell disgusting. The young man beckoned at the frowning white fox to follow him as they head to the river. The rushing of water greeted their ears as they arrived at the river. Its current was a bit forceful, however, the water by the edge of the wide river was gentle and shallow. Pink toes entered the slightly cold water, followed by delicate knees and fleshy thighs. Moulin removed his clothing and underwear but placed the furry cloak on a tall rock. He began to wash the clothes and submerging them in the water. He was careful with the delicate silk robe. It seems to cost more than his life. Afterward, Moulin began to wash himself clean. A naked beauty bathed in the supposedly freezing river under the gentle snow. The enchanting scene would make one's temperature rise and their heart beat fast. Snowflakes melted on his pale milky skin. Wet long wavy silver-white hair draped down his smooth pale back. It curtained down the small slender waist and its curly tips covered only half of the youth's voluptuous tempting body. Something doesn't feel right. Moulin stopped. His lower body felt too chilly and exposed. His nether regions felt exposingly unusual. Slender eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Looking around for any unsuspecting eyes, he moved behind a big rock. His eyes looked down at his lower body and inspected. He frowned a bit at the size of his exposed organ. Why does it remind him of a skinned lychee? Gentle fingers began to move beneath his genitals and towards the place between his thighs curiously. Touch. Fleshy. He blinked. This time he exerted a bit of pressure on his fingers. He flinched and let out an unexpected yelp. Moulin quickly withdrew his hand. A foreboding thought pressed in his mind. His heartbeat slowly rising as he bent to take a peek. A horrific scream echoed across the snowy mountains. Snow jumped out of shock at the sudden noise. It quickly jumped out of the water and ran to the place where his master bathed. What greeted him was the sight of his master on his knees cradling his head, mouthing whispers. Moulin's heartbeat rose to a high level as he searched the original's memories in a haze of panic. Muttering a string of curses, he stopped at a forgotten knowledge the original normally ignored. When pure ability-wielding Mayruthans copulate, there was a significant chance of reproducing an Aphrodite child. Aphrodites are Mayruthans who possess both sexes of the human male and female. Out of 10 pure-blooded Mayreuthan children, only one is an Aphrodite. Aphrodites are rare and precious creatures. They were all born beautiful in a certain way, and the children born from them are exceptionally talented and skilled. These people were like treasures treated with extreme care. Although, only very few Aphrodites had ever inherited their parents' ability. Moulin's opinion over the new world leapt to a new kind of weirdness. Sure, he was gay, but this whole thing was extremely foreign for him to the point of dumbness. Why did he miss this kind of information? A small worried whine was heard from his right. Snow licked Moulin's knees as a form of comfort. His master is in distress, what should it do? For what feels like an hour, Moulin managed to calm his emotions. He dressed hastily and picked up the snow-white fox from the wet ground. Back on Earth, he would be what people would call a hermaphrodite, not an Aphrodite. As similar as it sounds, they are completely different. They had transgenders back home too, not hermaphrodites. The latter mostly indicates animals and plants. And isn't Aphrodite some kind of a goddess of love and beauty in Greek mythology? At least some part of the definition is alike. A frustrated youth sat on a rock by the edge of the river, a fox on his lap. Is this some kind of consequence after living his peaceful weeks here in the New World? He could not help but become gloomy. Moulin had no choice but to accept his circumstances. But he was still a bit reluctant. A strange world, a stranger's strange body, a strange cave, a strange voice, a strange ability. Oh my God, Moulin groaned. He felt like his imaginary jar of stress has been filled up again. Unaware of the sudden stern look of the little snow fox, who heard a suspicious movement from the other side of the river, Moulin continued to sigh, please don't let this get any worse. Boom! Moulin almost threw snow into the water if it wasn't for the fox's quick reflexes. The sudden noise nearly scared his soul out of him. What was that? He narrowed his eyes as he stood up vigilantly. He sensed a strange abnormality of the snow from deep inside the woods at the other side of the river. An agonizing scream resounded. A person. The young man was startled. Moulin had a slight hesitation, but he couldn't ignore a person in trouble. Perhaps, a silent peek of the situation and then he'll decide whether to help or not. He froze a thick sheet on the surface of the river, creating a frozen bridge. He sprinted across the bridge, barefooted and with snow tailing behind him. He sensed rough movements on the snow ahead and followed his instincts. When he reached the other side, he continued to dash forward with silent steps as he passed rows of tall trees and the nearing sound of clashing metal. His steps decreased, slowing down behind a wide tree. His silver eyes caught 2 men fighting off 20 others. One wounded man, the blood leaked from his hand clutching his stomach. He was severely wounded and his energy draining as he stood behind his companion. The other was surprisingly calm. A storm brewing in his unforgiving glowing pair of gold pupils as he severed the head of an incoming enemy by his right. Screams rang from left to right. His sword dripping with the blood of his opponents, who were faltering. Deep golden hair swayed with his sharp movements, both vengeful and unrelenting. For some reason, the hidden young man found himself paying more attention to the attractive heroic form of the man. However, the sight of bloodied severed limbs and entrails on the white snow made Moulin a little furious. Bloodied tainted snow. These people. Out of the blue, an enemy charged towards the wounded lad and pierced his sword through his shoulder. An agonizing scream escaped from the lad's mouth as his knees fell to the ground. His blood pooling down his body, the stench of death closing in. The heroic man turned to his companion only to be obstructed by 5 more foes. A sad smile graced the wounded man's bloodied lips as he stared at his friend, the sharp blade of a knife slid near his neck to finish him. Whiz! All of a sudden, a large bolt of ice bursts through the head of the wounded man's captor. Bits of brain matter and blood splattered on the pure snow as he fell with a thud. The sudden kill froze the movements of every single person. Who did it? Chapter 7. Golden Eyes. Dark red blood appeared to befoul the flawless white snow as it spread outwards beneath the corpse of a man. A large hole gaped at the snowfall. Tiny snowflakes entered the cavity, melting from the blood and the mangled insides of the head. The wounded man clutched his shoulder instantly after escaping death. His eyes fell upon a solid blood-stained stake like ice in front of him. He knew then that his savior might be an ice wielder. He was still shuddering from his fright of the remaining seconds of losing his life. "Who's there?" one of the black men yelled. Another bothersome pest was trying to hinder their plans. He snuck needles between his fingers. His subordinates surrounded their target, the golden-eyed man, silently. The snow fell silently and gently, but it felt like shadowing a monstrous secret. Waiting to be unveiled, the golden-eyed man surveyed the area. He sensed a single life form behind the trees, but the snow was somehow obstructing his senses. He glanced at his friend, barely holding on. He had lost too much blood. But he dared not to act rashly, for this was unknown territory. Something was watching them. He knew some creatures tend to be very territorial. A piercing scream came from behind him. A man with freshly severed legs crawled on the snow, his bones visibly protruding. He wailed noisily at the harrowing pain as crimson liquid trailed behind him. Another cry of pain sounded briefly as 3 bodies laid on the ground, blades of ice sticking out from their chest, their breaths fading. The concentrated stench of blood circulated the air. An ice wielder. The leader of the assassins raised his dagger as he paid no attention to his dying men. A glowing fireball lit from his hand as he steadied himself for an attack. His ability was far more superior than a measly ice ability. His fast reflexes made him dodge a bolt of ice coming his way and strike the one behind him instead. He followed where the bolts came from and launched the ball of fire at a big tree at his right. The tree's trunk exploded, tiny splinters flew sharply around the area of impact. The tall tree fell forward, revealing no one. The disappointed fire assassin gnashed his teeth as he looked around, completely ignoring his actual target. Meanwhile, the ruthless golden eyes shifted behind him as his comrade's savior reveals himself from hiding. His eyes locked on a short white figure meters away from them. Silky white robes draped down just above his bare feet. A white furred hood covered half of the person's pale face, exposing his luscious red lips. A faint white glow surrounded his frost-covered fingers. Exhaling a warm visible breath from his lips, he lifted a slender arm. He looked like a majestic illusion that would disappear in a blink of an eye. Moulin's thoughts. What am I doing? 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 Why am I doing this? I just wanted to peek. Snow was nowhere to be found. The pipsqueak was burying itself into the snow out of fright. The snow beneath the rest of the assassins hardened. Their feet stuck and trapped. They were caught off guard and began to panic. The mixture of the sound of cursing and the cries of pain were irritating. Ice began to climb their way up their bodies rapidly. The blood freezing and flesh hardening. Just like how painful Moulin experienced it the first time. The scene was as similar as bugs caught in a spider's web. One particular bug, however, was especially irksome. The leader of the assassins managed to forcefully release himself from the trap, resulting in a pair of bloodied skinned legs. Red beads of blood leaked from the pores of the pale flesh. His teeth bared at Moulin. A maddening desire to burn this prick alive overtook his reasoning. Steam expelled from his skin as his temperature rose to an unbelievable degree. A fire suddenly engulfed him, melting away the snow around him. Flaming orbs orbited around his body while he roared at Moulin. Moulin's expression was unreadable, but he was truly threatened by the current situation. How can he back down when things had already come to this? Of course, he had to fight back. Moulin gazed at the enraged man in front of him, unaware of the faint black mist from the tips of his fingers. He readied himself for his very first combat experience with another ability user. Out of nowhere, a crackling line of golden lightning directly struck the flaming man with a loud bang. What once was a living man, a charred corpse, now stood in front of the youth. The body fell with a loud thud, crumbling into dust. Moulin gawked speechless at the unexpected turn of the fight. He turned his eyes at the golden-haired man who retracted his outstretched hand. Moulin blinked stupidly. If he was this FC King strong, why didn't he help in the first place? Frowning, Moulin walked towards the man who was already kneeling beside his already unconscious friend and slowly treating him. He was quite bleeding a lot. At this rate he might die of blood loss. The golden-eyed man faced Moulin. He bowed his head slightly. "We apologize for invading your territory, miss. My companion and I were being pursued and were unfamiliar with the land." Moulin stared at him under his bangs. With a close look, this man was sinfully attractive. His narrow eyes were fierce. He had a straight nose, glorious sexy lips, and stunning golden hair. Like golden threads made from the fires of the sun. His tight muscles and well-proportioned muscular body was fit for a soldier. He had a dignified and imposing aura with a hidden ruthlessness. Moulin bet that a lot of women would have begged to bear his offspring. Too bad he isn't my type. This guy is way too fancy. Also, I'm a man, Moulin said with a blank stare. The walking sex magnet in front of him froze. Moulin rolled his eyes as he pulled back the hood. His silver hair draped down his shoulders and he raised an eyebrow at the man. "I am not a girl. I am a man, technically half of each, but I still am a man." Moulin looked down at his wounded unconscious friend, unaware of the deep gaze the other man's cavernous eyes were giving him. A gaping wound bared itself in front of Moulin. He really didn't mean to involve himself with these people. But the thought of the young lad submissively awaiting his death by the edge of the blade, he could not stop himself. However, when he murdered those men, he felt a loathsome sense of satisfaction. As if he was just cutting down animals. He hated it, but he felt the need to finish them. "Hadrian," Moulin snapped out from his thoughts when a deep magnetic voice spoke. His eyes shifted to the man kneeling before him. "My name." Golden eyes narrowed at him. "Tell me yours." Moulin was silent for a few seconds. What a straightforward man this is. My name is Moule." He almost blurted out his real name to a complete stranger. He's not that stupid to reveal himself to someone unfamiliar in his circumstances. Also, his current reputation is as grimy as a chimney. Hadrian was it. Well, whether if it's real or not, Moulin doesn't care a bit. Night is approaching, Moulin reminded the man before him. "If you seek shelter, come with me. However, you must leave when the sun rises." He will give them a bit of his kindness before kicking them out. The wounded man would not survive out in the cold. Hadrian nodded and began to carry his friend. Moulin noticed there was something suspicious about this man. His bright golden eyes clearly indicate he was of pure Maruthan blood. The aura and his ruthless martial arts signified that he might be part of a high-born family. Without a doubt, this man was someone Moulin would not dare to offend. Nevertheless, the white-haired youth was not afraid. This was his turf after a forgotten snow. Together, they left the bloodied area and crossed the ice bridge to the other side of the river. Not a word was spoken while traveling towards the frozen mountain cave in front of a large frozen lake. Moulin led the way through the tunnel and arrived at another roomy place just beside where he usually sleeps. They laid down the injured man on Moulin's extra piece of fur cloak. Hadrian began to treat his companion while Moulin watched by his side. The serious golden-haired man took out a blue vial, unrecognizable to Moulin. "It appears to be some kind of healing medicine." Hadrian lifted the tip of the opening to his friend's mouth until every last drop was consumed. Seconds later, the previously deathly complexion of the injured man became a bit more lively. His wounds gradually mend itself. This heaven-shocking fluid completely stunned Moulin to his core. Amazing. Who was he? Moulin kneeled beside Hadrian as he took off his fur coat. Ads by PubFuture. My subordinate. We got attacked as we made our way through the woods. So he's one of your guards. Moulin pretty much knew he was hiding something. Quote. Yes, the sun in the man's pupils had a deep shade of deep gold. The corner of his intriguing lips turned up. This young man was interestingly captivating. How long have you been here, Moule? Moulin stiffened. He stood up from the man's side, narrowing his eyes at him. Hostility grew around the young man as his silver eyes stared into the man's golden ones. How do you know that I haven't been dwelling in this place ever since I was born? Hadrian didn't expect the sudden resentment of the young man. He admits that his question was a bit personal, but he was sincere. The heedful beauty in front of him looked like a feline with sharp claws ready to pounce at the slightest provocation. How interesting. Apologies. I was not minding my words. Regardless, Hadrian apologized. Moulin only gave him a doubtful look before turning around and exiting the cave. He didn't really recognize me, did he? Was it too obvious that he had been living here temporarily? Perhaps, he was one of those people who ridiculed the original or one of those people in the scum-quade's engagement ceremony. Whoever he was, he could not help but suspect the man. Those deep sun-colored eyes were clearly hiding something. That shady handsome man cannot be trusted. However, he'll just have to survive the night until the sun rises. Chapter 8. A cautious Moumou. Moulin finally ignored his thoughts as he reluctantly prepared to make food for his temporary guests. He always cooked beside the cave, in a stone-like niche where the snow doesn't fall. Moments later, the suspicious blonde man of his thoughts came to help him after tending his injured guard. Not a word was said as they ate. Moments later, a brilliant fire crackled within the circle of stones. Two people sat, as silent as the night, one with unyielding bright golden eyes and one with bewitching silver-white ones. A snowy white fox snuggled on Moulin's lap, glimpsing at the stranger in front of his master curiously. Soft slender hands stroked Snow's fur, lulling him to sleep. Moulin practically found Snow very cute when he sleeps. It is very small. Moulin paused. What's he getting at? He is young and growing. He shot an icy look in his way. Shouldn't you be tending your injured friend, Lord Hadrian? He's already out of danger. The man glanced at the cave entrance. Besides, he is fortunate to have been saved by a charming beauty and receiving my care. Moulin cocked an eyebrow. I might mistake you of an egotistical flirt if you do not correct yourself. A merry chuckle escaped Hadrian's lips. The young man in front of him was quite amusing. No one has ever dared to talk to him like this. Interest rising, he studied the stunning beauty in front of him. In Moulin's viewpoint, Hadrian's frame was adorned by the orange light of the fire. His sun-like pupils locked on Moulin. His thick clothes could not hide the diamond-cutting muscles. It screamed of supreme masculinity, something Moulin can never achieve in his lives. The man's eyes bore at Moulin, a smile plastered on his face. For a moment, Moulin could hear his heartbeat quicken. Your eyes tell me that I've already been branded by that title in your heart. His tone was annoyingly confident. I can't help but ask, how may I have offended you? Moulin sneered and lifted his chin as he studied the man. Well, he paused. You're quite annoying, arrogant, and clearly you don't have the skills to woo a person even though you look like a philanderer. You are awfully suspicious and you can't read the mood of the situation before you open that mouth of yours. Quote. Do you wish for me to woo you? Hadrian ignored the rest of the insults. He was unaware of how bad the young man's impression of him was. No, Moulin replied almost instantly. He didn't know why he mentioned that part. His thoughts were so loud he couldn't help saying it. You haven't truly seen the real me. Perhaps you'll change your mind if you do. He grinned at Moulin, who couldn't help but shudder. No, thank you. The snowflakes fell lesser and lesser until it thoroughly stopped. The chilling breeze became gentler. Snow clouds had dispersed and moonlight glimmered on the surface of the frozen lake. The wide lake sparkled like a wondrous starry sea. It was remarkably mesmerizing. The captivated Moulin gently laid down Snow and decided to take a midnight stroll on the lake. He ignored the other man as he walked right past him. His bare feet left the snowy ground and stepped on frozen water. A refreshing chilly breeze swept his silver-white hair. He continued to walk ahead with his head lowered. The frozen lake had reflected the dark sky, twinkling stars illuminated its surface. It was calm and silent, except from the heavy footsteps that imitated his every step. Eyebrows drawn together, Moulin let out an exasperated sigh. He steps back to turn around and face the man who followed him. What are you doing? You don't mind if I join you, would you? It's quite lonely to be facing the fire by myself, you see. Hands tucked in his pockets, the man's eyes gleamed under the moon. He stood a meter away from Moulin, waiting for his answer. The white-haired youth wanted to refuse but felt that he might be a bit rude if he did, so he shook his head. No, I don't. The man was instantly beside Moulin with a gratifying smile. Moulin pulled back his gaze as the two continued to walk leisurely. It's dangerous for an Aphrodite Maruthan to walk alone in the dark, don't you think? Hadrian spoke after a few minutes of silence. I did not allow you to walk with me so that you would lecture me. Also, I can defend myself, he retorted. Maruthans could recognize their own kind, so it wasn't surprising for Hadrian to know that he was an Aphrodite Maruthan. I don't need anyone to tell me that. Hadrian eyed the young Maruthan. He thought of how this young man could find contentment in this solitary and wintry landscape. He was like a deer separated from his herd yet free and contented. But he was also unaware of the devilry and murky wickedness of the world. A pure soul refusing to leave from his comfort and would die protecting it. Although he was surrounded by the coldest wind and the freezing snow, he was like a flame dancing at the center. You are really peculiar. Moulin's steps decreased and finally stopped a few meters behind the man. He narrowed his eyes at the man as if waiting to finish what he means. It's a compliment, Hadrian quickly clarified. He slanted his head, resisting the urge to laugh. A corner of Moulin's lips turned up as he observed the man in front of him. You're really unafraid, are you? Hadrian paused as he pondered about his question. Out of the blue, his Maruthan senses kicked in from below him. He lowered his head to inspect. The ice below him was perilously thin. One step could break it. The dark depths of the lake were utterly ominous. A beguiling smile graced his lips as he shifted his sight back to the youth in front of him. How sly. Moulin's expression was unreadable. He had retracted the ice from the middle of the lake towards the edge slowly, thinning the ice of the interior. He deliberately stopped a few meters away from the center of the large lake, where the depths were, and trapped the man. He didn't want to harm Hadrian, he just gave him a little threat. Though, Moulin did not know yet that this man could effortlessly avoid this little trap as easily as swatting a fly. The threatened man stood erect and gazing deeply at Moulin. What are you implying? Devising a dangerous thing like this? The beguiling smile hadn't left his face and his black boots pressed on the ice. Golden pupils bore at Moulin. A frosty breeze swept Moulin's silver-white hair and moonlight shined on his delicate pale skin. I just want to ask you something. Moulin observed the calm man. Well, we can discuss this something of yours in a more comfortable situation, can't we? I'm afraid I am only comfortable conversing with you like this. Moulin smiled gently at the man. I cannot trust you. A raging fire ran chaotically inside Hadrian. Something dangerous was trying to resurface from the depths of his mind the longer he stared at the frail young man in front of him. A smirk formed on his lips and his hands clenched in his pockets. His hands were itching to possess something. It felt unusually empty. What is it that you want to ask, Mole? Are there more people coming to pursue you and your friend? He questioned. If there were more, then he needed these two to leave quickly. This wasn't safe for him anymore. The ones you saw were the last of them. We took care of the others on our way here. Moulin sighed in relief. Hadrian grinned at his reaction. Anything else? Are you from a noble family? Moulin asked, curiously. Surely, you must be from one. Your eyes tell me you are. The white-haired youth leaned forward, inspecting his bright golden with his hands clasped behind his back. Yes, he was quite comfortable conversing with the man like this. Hadrian paused for a moment. Yes, I am. Moulin blinked at his answer and silently nodded. Are you not going to ask about my nobility? Hadrian scrutinized Mole's alluring face. I'd rather not, Moulin replied blandly, his hands fidgeting behind him. I refuse to be an audience of your arrogant face if you start bragging about your aristocracy. This is the woods, my lord, not a noble gathering. The man laughed, his charming messy hair swayed. Moulin was startled at the sudden reaction. Which part of that was humorous? However, the man's laugh was quite magnetic. Hadrian's eyes gleamed. There was no more of that bothering smugness in his eyes but a strange softness. Moulin had to admit that this man is more striking if he smiles. Like a bullet that shoots right in the heart. You, are really different from the Aphrodites I have ever met. Hadrian spoke his thoughts unknowingly. He was rarely like this. Moulin cocked his head, his eyebrows knitted. Different? How do you actually assess those people in your eyes? Coquettish and kittenish, like they would faint at the sight of a drop of blood, the man snorted. You, on the other hand, are as devilish as a winter demon. Moulin rolled his eyes. I am unique because I am who I am. Don't think that your flirty words would work on me. His inviting red lips pressed into a thin line as he turned around to walk away. That is all. Good night, Sir Hadrian. The man with sun-like eyes was stunned. The walls around this delightful young man were incredibly thick. He couldn't drill into it. Wasn't everything fine moments ago? His chest trembled inside as he watched Moulin walk away. His long wavy hair swaying with his movements like a spirit in the night. The blushing toes of his delicate small feet pressed on the frozen ice in every step he takes. His thin silky robes hugged his figure exquisitely. Are you going to leave me like this? That is quite discourteous, he could not help but blurt out. Moulin paused his steps and groaned as he turned around, a mocking gaze shot at Hadrian. Don't think that I can't see your confidence in removing yourself from my so-called trap, Sir Hadrian. I am not someone that can entertain a person like you. With that, he trotted back to the snowy grounds. Hadrian watched Moulin pick up his little fox and entered the cave without even sparing him a single glance. Sigh, how cruel. The frigid wind pricked Hadrian's skin as if taunting him. Ah, he should have really chosen his words carefully. It seems that he cannot treat this young man lightly like the others. Was he really that intimidating? Nevertheless, the young man's spitefulness towards him was quite cute. The man laughed silently through the night. A gorgeous white. Chapter 9. A weapon after the farewell. The snowfall had ceased. Rising shades of pink and purple overwhelmed the ink-blue sky. The white wintry landscape has turned into a hazy tint of pink, and silence settled through each part of the mountain. A small head of wavy silver hair shifted gently by its body's movements, crouching on the deep snowy ground. Pale hands pressed on tightened snow. A little chuckle was heard outside the cave. "Snow, you little brat," Moulin muttered. Tiny flakes of snow was stuck on both his eyelashes after a certain little fox's playful stunt of kicking a pile of snow at his face. "Don't do that again." Snow ran circles around his master, making a sound of understanding. It tripped on the hem of Moulin's robes and rolled on the snow twice. The little master ignored the fox, contemplating if this little creature was really a fox or a dog. He finished his work of art and cleaned his hands of the snow in satisfaction. Done. Snow stopped by his master's side and slanted his head at what was in front of him. "This is what you call a snowman," Moulin presented, his eyes gleaming. "We've got no carrots for the nose, so I used a pebble instead." The snowman in front of the pair of man and fox was 3 balls of snow stacked on top of each other with small stones for the eyes, nose, and mouth. It had thin branches for arms, and it doesn't look anything like a man at all. It was only 10 inches tall. From the fox's perspective, it looked like a small troll ready to pick a fight with him. Eyes narrowing with hostility, the white fox growled at the snowman. Moulin lifted a hand and patted Snow's head. "What's wrong with you?" Unknowingly, a dark shadow loomed over the frame of Moulin. The silver-headed boy under his gaze looked very defenseless and frail. An excellent prey for the wicked and the selfish. The blood in his veins rushed inside him as his lips turned up into a harmless smile. "It seems that your little friend is threatened with this, snowman, of yours." Moulin had already sensed the man when he strode behind him. He carefully picked up his friend Fox and stood up to confront the man behind him. "You haven't left yet." Hadrian felt that Moulin really wanted to get rid of him soon. Regardless, he ignored the tone of the youth and spoke, "I wanted to ask you something." Moulin stared blankly at him. "What is it that you wanted to ask?" There was no more of the formality between him and the man. He was leaving anyway, he didn't care anymore. Hadrian's guard was recovering gradually, and he needed a doctor's assistance for his complete recovery. The godly man in front of Moulin looked into his eyes. A few golden strands were messily sticking out from his head. This single irregularity completely shattered his supposedly determined appearance. After last night's conversation, Moulin was full of thoughts. He admits he was a bit childish, like a child afraid of his plaything being stolen. Perhaps it was because his cautiousness hadn't subsided after the fight with the assassins. Nonetheless, he felt a faint guilt. Sleep had really enabled him to clear his mind. "Come with me." The man voiced out these words. He would not force Mole to follow them if he would refuse. But he would give him the chance to change his mind from staying here. Moulin calmly stared at the man. Internally, his thoughts were cluttered and confusing. This was a great chance to leave this place and truly discover the world beyond the vast snowy mountains of the north. However, he was hesitant and afraid. He was scared of the beautifully dangerous things and wonders this world had to give to him. He was anxious about the unfamiliarity and strangeness, yet very curious. Perhaps, a little longer. Moulin reached out his hands and unconsciously adjusted the flying hair strands of the man in front of him. The golden sun eyes widened at the gentle approach. Looking fixedly at the tender expression, Hadrian discovered the glinting silver eyes were like warm, impenetrable diamonds. Moulin flinched at his actions and immediately lowered his hand. Why did he do that? He felt strange and confused. He was thinking too hard that he didn't realize his movements. He hadn't felt this distracted for a long time. "I cannot go with you." Moulin avoided his eyes, embarrassed. "I'm going to stay here a little bit longer." There was a faint hesitance in his tone, but he truly meant what he said. Hadrian had already expected the young man's reply. He didn't muse over Mole's refusal and accepted it. There was also an indistinct relief in his heart. The youth's tenderness and purity of his heart would at least be hidden here. In a place hidden from the world, surrounded by freezing mountains and tall trees as far as the eye can see. A place only he knows. Hadrian nodded, understanding the youth's choice. "Thank you for taking us in." Moulin gave out a pleasing smile at him. "You're welcome." Even though WHNU was only intruding in your fight with the assassins when you actually are very powerful and could have finished them yourself, or when I asked you to leave as soon as possible with your friend, or when I was extremely harsh on you last night. Still, you're welcome. Do you remember the way? Any person could easily get lost in these woods. Almost every tree is identical. Moulin frowned. He was a bit concerned with their departure. The snow was thick, wild animals roamed, and it was especially freezing. Golden eyes sparked. Hadrian noticed Moulin's worries and told him that they only need to know the way back to the river and they could take care of the rest. Snow can lead you back. Slender arms placed the fox back on the snowy ground. Snow gazed at the golden-haired man that befriended his master, suspiciously. Disappointment flashed in Hadrian's eyes. You aren't sending us off yourself. Really? The young man before him still finds him distrustful. Moulin shook his head in response. If he would do so, he might be tempted to reconsider his choices. Unfortunately, I can't. I have other things to do. The nobleman searched Moulin's expression of any hints of alibis but realized it wasn't any of his business to meddle with. He calmly watched the young man. I understand. On behalf of my guard, I would like to thank you for saving his life. An amusing smile appeared on Moulin's pretty face as he glanced at somewhere behind Hadrian. He can tell me that himself. An injured man with thick bandages visible underneath the high collar of his large black winter cloak silently stood erect a couple of meters away from them. His short-cut auburn hair revealed his rough eyes and clean jaw. Gleaming brown eyes full of respect fixed on Moulin. Quote, "My lady." A smiling expression cracked. Moulin felt a nerve bulge on his forehead as he scowled at the bold man. Hadrian also frowned as he turned to face his subordinate, who was taken aback by the fierce expressions of the pair in front of him. Did he do something wrong? He is a man, Varric. Has your eyesight malfunctioned? His piercing eyes were so beast-like, Varric's soul shuddered. My apologies. Please forgive my rudeness. He bowed his head, regrettable for his actions. The young ice wielder was quite the stunner. He seriously thought the person was female. Moulin rolled his eyes, internally cursing his feminine face. Was his appearance entirely feminine? He swore his looks had a faint maleness in them. This face also shares the same handsomeness as his two brothers. Did these two overlook his masculinity? Moulin expressionlessly waved his hand to greet the red-head male. How are you? He asked, completely switching the topic. Varric smiled cheekily as held his stomach. I am almost fully recovered. Thank you for saving me. I am in your debt. Full of gratitude, he gave a sincere bow of respect at Moulin. You are welcome. Moulin nodded at him and shifted his gaze back at the nobleman in front of him. The soul-stunning eyes of gold never failed to astound Moulin no matter how many times he gazed at them. In return, Hadrian watched him, studying every part of Moulin's face. I believe is goodbye, Sir Hadrian. Moulin spoke first, realizing the man was as silent as a ghost. Mn, replied the golden-haired man. I hope we meet again, Mole. If that is really your name. A corner of his mouth turned up. Moulin chuckled. His eyes were clear and radiant like a crystal lake of ice, beautiful and mesmerizing. I do hope not. The future is awfully unpredictable, my lord. Hadrian smirked at him and said nothing. Perhaps, he would really come and visit this captivating young man in the future. He was really looking forward to the youth's reaction. The invisible snow-white fox made a small sound and rubbed himself on his master's bare calves before leisurely making its way to the woods, waiting for the guests to follow him. Hadrian ignored the small creature and looked at Moulin one last time before following the fox. He will definitely meet him again in the future. Varric, the red-head knight, gratefully bowed at Moulin and looked at him for a few seconds before following Hadrian. Footprints marked the deep snow and trailed towards the thick maze-like woods until the two figures disappeared from Moulin's sight. Unknown to Moulin, the golden-haired nobleman had glanced back at him from far away, imprinting the picture of a small white lonesome figure of a frail young man, barefooted on the snow with the chilly breeze brushing through his silver-white hair and with sharp yet gentle eyes. It was like a godly ethereal painting with a unique beauty that could topple down countries. Hadrian turned his eyes away with a strange smile on his face. One that made Varric shudder uncontrollably, thinking of what his young master could be scheming this time. And whatever it was, he was sure he would not be getting any rest any time soon, injured or not. They traveled away led by an impatient small fox. A solitary figure stood before a huge frozen lake with the wind caressing his cheeks. Head filled with thoughts. Honestly, after the events yesterday he realized there were people much stronger than him in both physical strength and power. Moulin knew he needed to train harder and strengthen himself. When the time comes, he will leave this place and face the dangers of the world with a strong soul and body. Currently, this feeble body of his is very weak, but it had tremendous internal power. If he could cultivate it further and further, then it will greatly ease his worries. What the voice taught him this time was about utilizing his powers by materializing objects through ice and snow. Of course, easier said than done. Moulin wasn't very confident in his creativity, unlike other people. However, it wouldn't hurt to make an effort. Puffs of cold smoke came out from his mouth while he breathed out. It was hard to be optimistic sometimes. Closing his eyes, mana coursing through his spiritual veins, and letting the ice control his arms as he directed in his mind. Flicker and flickering, it felt like unknown energy was released from a black hole inside of him. And yet this same hole was bottomless and everlasting. Like painting a picture in his mind, he tried to construct a weapon that he could summon at any time. He didn't even bother to start small and leap to the next level. A comfortable chill ran through every part of his body as his hand reached out into the air unconsciously. His hand opened and fingers flexed. Heart beating fast, his hands shook lightly as snowflakes pieced together in the middle of his palm. Rapidly solidifying and glowing with an intensely bright glare. It stretched outwards, leaving behind intricate silver swirls marked into the materializing weapon. Moulin's hand shook lightly at the pressure in his mind. Fine crystal ice weaved itself into a thin unbreakable cord. The materializing weapon swiftly solidified, settling in Moulin's grasp. More puffs of cold smoke escaped from the youth's lips as his light eyelashes trembled before opening themselves. Gawking at the object in his grip, a rush of excitement wrapped around his heart, floating with joy and the proud sense of accomplishment. Like a wave of happiness enveloping his entire frame. "I made this," he declared proudly. In his grasp was a crystallized ice bow. It was 4 feet long and silver elegant swirls marked the surface of the limbs. The grip, a snug fit in his grasp, even though it was entirely made of ice, it was cool and comfortable with the surface of his skin. Intricate and elegant designs on the string grooves like beautiful silver vines and the gorgeous structure of fragile snowflakes. It gave off an air of sharpness and charm. Although it was a bit plain, it is exactly how Moulin wanted it. He wanted to try using it. Even though he was clearly an amateur on archery, he felt a deep connection with the weapon in his hand, like a call. His hold on the grip tightened and directed his energy into the bow. Fingers grasping the string, the bow glowed a soft light and a sharp arrow of ice emerged and settled on the arrow rest. Pulling the string with a strong grip and fixing his posture, Moulin aimed seriously at the tip of a tree on the far side of the enormous lake. His heightened senses magnified his vision for his target. All he needed to do was to let go of the string. Calm breaths. Silver eyes narrowed almost into a glare in full concentration. Slender fingers relaxed and, ow, a certain white fox jumped into his legs, causing him to wobble and lose his grip on the strings. The aim diverted from its target and shot into somewhere in the woods as fast as lightning, sharp and deadly. Snow. A loud voice echoed through the mountains. Chapter 10. Found at last. Light gentle clouds blanketed over the vast wintry landscape. The snowflakes fell like light tiny feathers brought down by the heavens, peaceful and without hurry. It was calm and quiet, unlike the burning anger from within Moulin's chest. His eyes snapped at Snow annoyingly, threatening the little creature. He really hated being interrupted. A tiny whimper sounded from a furry ball of white, hiding in the deep snow, and his small eyes peeking out, aggrieved. He felt wronged and regrettable. Moulin was about to reprimand Snow when his eyes met the white fox's teary and adorably eyes, seeking his master's comfort like a wronged baby. This familiar tactic almost made Snow throw up blood. This little brat doesn't know anything but making trouble and flashing his cute face. But Moulin couldn't have the heart to scold those pitiful eyes. Finally, swallowing his irritation, he surrendered to those eyes and gave Snow a gentle pat. "You scared me. Next time warn me before you go all crazy again, all right?" Snow yipped happily and moved to snuggle on Moulin's silk-covered lap. Helplessly sighing, the silver-headed youth realized his empty hands. The bow must have disappeared after he fell on the snow. But the arrow, he wondered where it landed. Wherever it was, he wished it didn't hit anything alive. Looking down at the beautiful white fur of the fox curling lazily on his thighs, he couldn't help but wonder if the two people had safely crossed the river. But he knew they would be all right. They were 2 grown men after all. A small smile was plastered on his face as he caressed Snow's fur. Calling his weapon was a success. He will try to practice harder without exhausting his mana. Then it would be easier to call it again. Remembering his trembling hands when he called upon his weapon, he was motivated to exercise the control of his energy when summoning his weapon again. He was tempted to take a short nap, however, the sky was bright and it was time to cook himself some food. He decided that everything would come after he ate his fill. Noon came immediately during Moulin's daily routine of cultivation. Unknown to Moulin, deep within the woods, miles away from the lake and the Moulin's icy cave, heavy black boots pressed into the snow hurriedly. A man wearing a long black winter cloak ran in difficulty through the deep snow, panting out chilly puffs of air as he made his way towards a thick tent covered in heavy snow. A small base settled in an open area surrounded by thick trees and deep snow. The man barged inside the tent guarded by two bulky men in uniforms bearing the Francis family crest. "Why, young master?" He hurriedly saluted the man before him. Deep gray eyes looked at the night under his eyelids and snapped irritably, "What?" A few papers laid on a wide wooden table with a single black ink bottle. Maxwell kneaded his forehead while he stood up from the chair and returned his stare at the night before him. Exhaustion layered his handsome face with visible dark circles under his eyes. "Speak." Swallowing down his fright he spoke, "The search team has discovered a sudden anomaly while scouting the southern part of the woods." He moved forward to hand over a folded note to the young lord sent by the leading knight of the search team. Gloved hands received the letter and Maxwell unfolded it to read its contents. His eyebrows drew together expressing his confusion and irritation. However, somewhere deep in his mind, there was a faint suspicion like a drop of black ink in clear water spreading out in his head, overwhelmingly him with curiosity. Narrowing his eyes, he clenched the note in his hands and adjusted his black furred cloak with a sapphire clasp. "Lead the way," he ordered, roughly. "Why yes, young master," the knight nodded and hastily rushed out to prepare the teleportation pearl. Shortly afterwards, Maxwell stood in front of a long vertical pole made out of alabaster. Its body was carved with symbols from the elven language and at the top was a transparent sphere powered by a single blue mana crystal. This type of device was mainly used for transporting a large group of people. However, it requires two teleportation pearls for transportation to happen, one for the current position and one for the designated destination. Maxwell and three knights entered the circle appearing on the snow with the light energy of the sphere. Their bodies faded with a flash and they were gone the next second. After a few seconds, the young heir with his group emerged in front of an identical teleportation pearl. "This way, young master," the informant knight with him led him towards the leader of the search team with quick steps knowing the young master was very impatient. "Young master." The leader saluted to him, his momentous posture noticeable. He gestured the lord to follow him as they walked with unhurried steps. "We have encountered an unexpected oddity. We were scouting the area towards the south when our spirit seer perceived a faint mana reaction a few miles away. We proceeded towards the direction of the reaction when we discover this." His hand motioned towards a startling sight a few meters away from them. What met Maxwell's sight was a tall tree, or what previously was a tall tree. Currently, it looked to be an explosion of concentrated enormous spikes of white ice skewering the tree and even freezing its splinters. The pointed spears of crystal ice struck the ground while its body mercilessly impaled the pitiful tree. Like large needles piercing a green twig in all directions. With one look, Maxwell knew it was the work of an ice wielder. He glanced at the leader, who, "We do not know." Our seer had lost the direction of the user as if she was being repelled. The man shook his head, disappointed. Maxwell stared at the horrendously violent ice. It was completely different from his or other ice wielder's ice. It was faintly white with flashes of various colors like a crystal diamond. A soft glow of blue visibly gleamed at each intersection of the spears. Brutal and elegant. Who did it? This wielder might be extraordinarily strong. Jonik, the young lord called out for the informant knight. "Yes, young master. Go back and gather the men. We will set out towards the north." Pressing his lips into a thin line, he looked up in the sky, noticing the approaching sunset. Finding the person responsible was better than finding nothing at all. It was almost a whole month since he joined the search for his younger brother. Burying the clawing pessimistic thoughts into the pit of his mind, he pleaded to the gods for hope. He refuses to stop unless he found Moulin's body, be it dead or alive. Hopefully, he wished he was somewhere out there, heart beating vigorously. "Ow, what is it, Snow?" Moulin asked with frosted hands after putting out the fire. The little fox kept eyeing the distance, even ignoring the roasted fish in front of him, catching the youth's attention. He was about to pacify Snow when he detected a faint irregularity with the snow a few miles away. He stood up straight with narrowed eyes. He had just finished sending off those two people. Are there more? Perhaps, were there other assassins left? No, there shouldn't be. Maybe a few big animals were battling or rutting at each other. That was a big possibility. Snow. Moulin crouched to stroke the white fur of the little fox, who nuzzled his head on Moulin's palm. Go and see what it is. After licking the youth's palm, Snow obediently dashed towards the woods. The fox was quick and small, his fur could camouflage with the white snow effortlessly. Moulin was sure Snow would be all right. Cute little paw prints on the snowy earth trailed deeper and deeper into the woods. Sharp haunting silver pupils searched like the eyes of an insatiable predator. The little creature could hear the sound of footsteps pressing into the snow growing louder and louder as he neared. At the time the show had died into the shade of the sunset sky, Snow had slowed down his pace and leisurely closed in towards the lights in the distance. Glowing orbs circles around the group of people, lighting their way as they bravely ventured deeper into the woods. The worsening coldness not only caused the knights to hesitate about advancing towards a destination they weren't sure could be worth their while but also aroused the thoughts of the third young master's possibility of being alive in this harsh cold wintry landscape. They knew the spoiled young master was frail and sickly, that even the simplest cold could make him feverish for a whole week. And with this severe everlasting coldness in this territory, there was no way he could survive here for a whole day. They pitied their noble household for withstanding the troubles this child always cause. "My lord. We've found something." Maxwell whipped his head behind him and the two guards behind him followed the informant, who was pointing at somewhere. The freckled-cheeked informant knight widened his eyes at a single creature with two glowing silver pupils in the dark. As if the eyes of death were reading the end of his life and choking the soul out of him. Why young master?" His pointer finger trembled. Maxwell and the rest also caught sight of this. The young heir wanted to ignore it and proceed forward, but the glint of the creature's eyes felt familiar for an unknown reason. Unconsciously, he took a few steps forward. And Snow growled menacingly at him, his teeth showing. With the light orbs revealing Snow, the fox could not help but be threatened and turn hostile. Gurjonik sighed in relief at the size of the little fox in front of him. This white fox was quite cute and was even less intimidating. The eyes of the fox were astonishingly silver and its size was abnormally small than regular northern snow foxes. It was very strange. Perhaps, it was a mixed breed. Snow stared at Maxwell with the intent to attack. The latter, however, had not the slightest idea of why this small creature seemed very aggressive with him. He really had done nothing wrong. Realizing that he was wasting valuable time with this little animal, he glanced at the fox one last time before turning away. "Let's move forward," he told his men. The group of people started to set out when out of the blue, a wave of soothing and pleasant pheromones enveloped them. Maxwell was the first one to notice this. Only a handful of beasts have the ability to release pheromones, particularly mystic ones. Unlike other beasts, these mystic beasts release pheromones to make other beasts compliant. Moreover, they can also wield these pheromones to communicate with other creatures, especially Mayruthans. And this little fox possessed this kind of unique ability. It couldn't possibly be a mystic beast. It was too small and it looked too vulnerable. Maxwell halted his steps and swiftly walked over towards the previously hostile fox, who was now as docile as a kitten. Silver eyes met Maxwell's gray ones. The knights watched in anticipation. This little animal was a possible mystic beast, it was just too unconvincing. Snow blinked his eyes, perceiving a small knowledge after closely looking at Maxwell's face. "Ow!" Snow turned around leisurely, glancing at Maxwell. After a few seconds, the little fox rushed into the woods unhurriedly. Maxwell stared blankly. "Young master, are you all right?" one of Maxwell's guards asked. The young lord glanced at him briefly. "It wanted me to follow him." The fox was sitting in the distance as if waiting for him. Its eyes were gleaming vibrantly in the dark, waiting for Maxwell to stop hesitating. Without wasting time he hurried to follow the fox calmly. Raising a hand, his men obediently followed their master. Trick or not, the young lord felt that he had to follow the fox or he would miss something very important. Meanwhile, thousands of silver strands danced elegantly with the wind as a young man wearing a white bear fur cloak stood in front of the lake impatiently and worriedly waiting. His eyebrows furrowed as he clutched his cloak tightly. He wasn't cold, just very worried. Did something happen to Snow? The sky had already darkened. At this time Snow would whine hungrily and would continuously rub on his legs, pitifully. His emotions were too disturbed to detect any possible movements on the snow. Should he go after him? Yes, he probably should, just in case. Normally, he wouldn't even step foot into the woods at night because of the wild beasts and the dangers lurking within, but this time he had to go for his small and bratty fox. With steady breaths, his bare feet began to walk on the lake towards the part of the woods where Snow had entered. He hoped that he wouldn't stumble upon any scary things while searching. Opening his palm, a small diamond-shaped ice crystal gave out a soft blue light. Shadowed by a blue glow in the dark, the youth walked carefully across the lake. Hopefully, that little fox won't be all mangled and blow. Just thinking about it made him shudder in concern. Okay, let's stop thinking about that. Suddenly, he halted his steps when he felt the familiar scurry of small legs on the snow. Snow. He saw the small fox happily running towards him as if he did something that should be praised for 1,000 lifetimes over and over. Look at how dark it is. Do you want to starve throughout the night? Is that what you want? What were you doing out there for so long? The sound of Moulin's loud voice almost scared the soul out of the little fox. Snow's delighted aura immediately dissipated after seeing his master's eyes seething with anger. He lowered his head and whimpered at Moulin's feet. Sighing heavily, his thick eyelashes fluttered as he eyed Snow out of concern. Seeing that this little brat was playing his typical pitiful look, Moulin smiled faintly. I was really worried. What if something happened to you out there? I'd have no one to talk to anymore if you were harmed. You understand that, right? Snow nuzzled on his palm, taking soft licks. Master, is still very good. All of a sudden, the frigid wind around Moulin stopped. He stiffened as he felt multiple gazes strike him down like heavy boulders. There was someone else in the area. His cautiousness immediately triggered the gears in his head as he stood erect watching his front warily. Indeed, there were people. Dark figures, one by one stepped out of the trees into the open area. One particular person stepped out of the dark, his eyes strained at the familiar frame of the youth on the lake. The young man wore thick white fur, but it couldn't hide the deep sense of familiarity that hooked the stern young lord. His heart beating so fast, he could not suppress the emotions in his heart as his gray eyes moistened. He is alive. He is alive. These thoughts repeated itself in his mind as if afraid it was all an illusion. He tricked himself. His younger brother is still alive. He wanted to shout, to move his legs and to grab him, but his body was stuck to the ground, emotions running wild. In the end, he only managed to call him Moulin.